What if everything you knew about Christianity was wrong? What if the true teachings of Jesus were hidden, suppressed by church officials who feared their power? In the early centuries after Christ, a strange and heretical group of mystics taught a very different message than the one you heard in Sunday school. According to Gnostics, the God you learned about there isn't God at all. If you spend your life obeying him, you won't like what happens when you kick the bucket. For the Gnostics, it wasn't about faith. It was about knowledge, and not just any knowledge. Many Gnostic teachers claimed a direct lineage from the apostles, who received hidden wisdom from Jesus himself. But the church wasn't buying it. Books were burned, heretics were excommunicated, and Gnosticism became a relic of Christian history. What secret could be so dangerous? For centuries, scholars had to piece together an understanding of Gnosticism from the writings of its opponents. The works of early Christians like Irenaeus and Hippolytus, rich as they are, were written to condemn these beliefs as heretical. But even in these writings, we find tantalizing clues of a faith that promised to free its adherents from the material world and elevate them into realms that even God himself was forbidden to enter. In December of 1945, everything changed. In northern Egypt, Muhammad and Khalifa Ali discovered a jar near the base of a boulder. They were reluctant to open it for fear it might contain evil spirits. And maybe they were right. But then again, they reasoned it could contain treasure, so they decided to take the risk. Muhammad smashed it open and golden flecks came flying out. This wasn't real gold, it was likely papyrus. Fragments from texts we may never get to read, scattered to the winds. It contained a library of texts that, before that day, were thought lost to history. These were the very scriptures banned, burned, and erased by the early church. Here at last, we could read these secrets for ourselves. So what were they? The contents of the Nag Hammadi library aren't exactly vast. In fact, the most famous scholarly translation is printed in a single volume. And between its covers, we find a considerable diversity of beliefs and perspectives. According to scholar James M. Robinson, these texts vary widely from each other as to when, where, and by whom they were written. Even the points of view diverge to such an extent that the texts are not to be thought of as coming from one group or movement. In this video, I'll attempt to give a general overview of the beliefs most characteristic of Gnostic Christianity. It's important to keep in mind that there was no uniform creed to which all Gnostics adhered. But there are a number of elements that still exert tremendous influence on Western civilization, from art to philosophy to politics to tech. We live in a culture permeated by Gnostic ideas. To get a sense of the Gnostic worldview, you'll need a radical change in perspective. You'll need gnosis, which is a spiritual knowledge, allowing you to see the world as it truly is, completely different from the way that other people do. In popular culture, perhaps the most famous example of gnosis can be found in The Matrix. Neo is a hacker who is drawn into a web of intrigue and introduced to the mysterious figure of Morpheus. Morpheus offers him a choice. He can take the blue pill and go back to his normal life like nothing ever happened, or he can take the red pill and his life will change forever. Neo chooses the red pill and receives gnosis. The world he's lived in, he discovers, isn't real at all. It's an illusion created by malicious machines who are harvesting the energy of human beings for their own nefarious ends. Neo, armed with gnosis, is able to see what the rest of us, still unaware of the Matrix and our terrible dilemma, cannot. So, did the Gnostics teach that we're all living in a simulation? Well, sort of, but worse. Dualism has a variety of meanings, so we need to be specific. Gnostic dualism generally assumes that reality is composed of an upper, immortal realm of spirit and a lower, perishing, corrupt realm of matter. In many Gnostic texts, the world we inhabit is a kind of cosmic accident, created by a being ignorant of the higher realms. The worlds below, comprising the visible universe, were dominated by spiritual principles called archons, Greek for rulers. Above them, separated by a gulf the archons cannot cross, are the eons. Different texts have different lists, names, and hierarchies for these eons, but at the risk of being reductive, it'd be easy to think of eons as the good guys and archons as the bad guys. The world we live in, rife with conflict, violence, lust, and suffering, is the product of the misbehavior of these archons in some accounts or their incompetence in others. In order to get to the realms above, beyond this veil of wrath and tears, we must receive gnosis. There's a great secret to discover, but wisdom, to quote Lil Wayne, is bleak. From the available documents, it's clear that many of these Gnostic groups had an understanding of the Bible and of theology that was antithetical to Orthodox ideas. You know, the God who created the world in 6 days and called it good? Forget about that. Here's the real story. The Apocryphon of John calls this God Yaldabaoth and identifies him as the God of the Hebrew Bible. In the opening chapter of Genesis, we read that the earth was without form and that God hovered over the face of the waters. According to the Apocryphon of John, though, God, or Yaldabaoth, saw the reflection of higher realms in these waters. Yaldabaoth, who was a lowly archon, a ruler over the material universe, didn't know there was anything above him, so he made a terrible mistake. On these waters, he saw the reflection of eons from the realms above, but Yaldabaoth believed that the beautiful reflection he saw was his own. Yaldabaoth, blind to his error, arrogantly proclaimed that he was the only God. Since he thought he was God, he set about bringing form to this corrupt world and making man. Yaldabaoth and the other archons formed Adam from dust, but Adam wasn't budging. They couldn't figure out what was wrong, but when they weren't looking, Sophia, a being from the higher realms, descended and placed a spirit within Adam. Adam and Eve, possessing something that the archons could not control or understand, a spirit originating from the world of eons, were not merely beings of the material realm. In many of these Gnostic systems, there's a complete inversion of mainstream religion. God is bad, the snake is good, and those who believe the standard narrative are duped by malicious, lower forces. The term Gnosticism has been used to denote a variety of movements and schools of thought. Often, doctrines incompatible with one another are grouped under the Gnostic umbrella. Gnosticism has been applied so often that the label these days could mean just about anything, or nothing at all. What I've tried to do here is provide a very basic overview of some texts that the early church found heretical, and to identify some themes common to many of these documents. These days, you'll hear that the Gnostic scriptures were hidden by closed-minded authorities. The Gnostic teachings, according to some, were the true doctrines of Jesus, and the early church tried to suppress them in order to keep its hold on power. But this view is, I think, myopic. If we look at the 3 tenets of Gnosticism discussed earlier, we'll be able to discover the real problem with Gnosticism and why it doesn't measure up to Orthodox Christian doctrine. The 3 tenets I listed, gnosis, dualism, and inversion, when adhered to, collectively have a profound and insidious effect on the worldview of the believer. The idea of gnosis, taken as a kind of higher knowledge, something that radically shifts the way we perceive reality, in itself isn't a negative thing. Any sincere convert to Christianity surely would testify to such a shift in their perspective. They begin to love their enemies, to pray for those who persecute them, to value heavenly things above earthly pleasure. The problem then isn't in receiving some kind of special knowledge, it's in the kind of knowledge received. If a spiritual force reveals to you that the material world is a mistake at best, or even evil by its nature, you'll naturally be suspicious of its creator. Remember, in Genesis, God called the world he created good, though it was soon corrupted by the fall. But Yaldabaoth isn't divine. He's a mess, a capricious and ignorant being who couldn't even breathe life into the man he made. It was the serpent, identified by Christians with the devil, who perform that all-important action. If you receive spiritual insight, gnosis, that God is bad and the devil is good, you might want to ask where it's coming from. And this is where the issue of dualism, at least as it's understood by many Gnostics, provides some insight. In many Gnostic systems, the material and spiritual realms are irreconcilable. The goal then would be to escape the material world and to find our true home in the realm of the eons. That's why Gnosticism often asserts that Christ didn't really suffer and die. The thought that God could become man with a mortal body, subject to the pain and temptation we experience, was a scandal to many in the ancient world. But with the incarnation, the birth of God into human form, the realm between the spiritual and the material collapsed. God became man so that our fallen material bodies could be made divine. Traditional Christian teaching asserts that Christ in heaven is in his resurrected body. For Christians, eternity doesn't take place in heaven. On the contrary, it takes place on a new earth, one made divine by Christ at his physical return. In the 21st chapter of Revelation, we find a beautiful description of this event. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them. They will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away." And the one who was seated on the throne said, "See, I am making all things new." Also he said, "Write this, for these words are trustworthy and true." Then he said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water as a gift from the spring of the water of life. Those who conquer will inherit these things, and I will be their God, and they will be my children." In this New Jerusalem, we see that all the problems to which our physical bodies are subject are done away with. Death, pain, and suffering are no more. We who are made in the image of God are at last able to fulfill the glorious destiny for which we were designed. And it is because Christ really became man, because he offers us his body to eat and his blood to drink, so that not just our spiritual, but our physical nature also can be conformed to his. I'll leave you with these words from the Maronite liturgy, which articulate why Christ's birth, death, and resurrection are so profound and so unique. They say, "You have united, O Lord, your divinity with our humanity, and our humanity with your divinity, your life with our mortality, and our mortality with your life. You have assumed what is ours, and you have given us what is yours, for the life and salvation of our souls. To you be glory forever."